Welcome to session 4. The focus of this session is teaching grammar. Before following a training session, please consider the following questions. Can you give a definition of grammar? Can you think of an English language grammar structure which does not exist in your first language? And how difficult is it to learn? How can you help your students understand and use it? Grammar can be defined as the study of how words and their component parts combine to form phrases and sentences. The study of rules, structural relationships, syntax and formation of language. There are two approaches when teaching grammar. Implicit, not direct, where students are introduced to grammar without being explicitly given the structure. The grammar is introduced in context and in a meaningful and useful way. This method avoids the need for knowing meta-language. It allows for the use of the chunking technique, where set phrases are taught rather than grammatical structures. The other approach is explicit, where the formula or structure of the grammar is provided, analysed and understood, almost mathematically first. Once the structure is highlighted, examples are built around it. Lessons are not usually very communicative and are more lecture-like and could be boring for the students. However, some parts of English are so different to the student's native language that even in context they may not be easily understood and so need to be taught explicitly. The teacher should bear these ideas in mind when teaching a new grammar point. Ultimately, it is down to the teacher's own style and what they feel more comfortable with. But the most common technique you'll find in the Imperial English courses is to introduce the grammar implicitly. But you can decide to consolidate the points explicitly if you feel necessary. You should keep in mind that some students, particularly older ones, may feel they are learning more if grammar is taught to them explicitly. Some may feel almost tricked if the grammar is introduced to them implicitly. You might need to explain that introducing it implicitly puts more emphasis on context and use, rather than really needing to see the grammar. You should use different contexts and examples when teaching explicitly, so that the students are aware of the different uses and not just one. This is particularly true when raising awareness of functions. You can give advice by saying, "You should." "You ought to." "If I were you." "I'd." Have you considered ing and other grammar patterns? And in some cases, the use of intonation is also significant. The last thing is that students may not be familiar with meta-language, even in their own language. Meta-language is the terminology for referring to language, even in their mother tongue. If you think about your friends and family who are not teachers, would they know what you mean by present perfect? Probably not, because they don't have to think about it in their own language. They just do it. So even if you've been teaching implicitly, you may have situations that arrive where you need to go back to these basics, because there is a need for the students to be able to use meta-language. Firstly, meta-language is a key to promoting learner autonomy. If a learner knows the terms adjective or noun and so on, that's a big help when recording and therefore learning vocabulary. If a learner can identify tenses or grammar items like articles, it is easy for the students to know what their weaknesses are and therefore what they should do to focus on in self-study. And secondly, perhaps the best way to learn a language is to talk about how to use that language. Like Little says, language is the tool by which the learning process is shaped and knowledge and skill are mediated. This is a matter of spoken communication. Any grammar that is introduced explicitly should be explained using meta-language and a variety of examples in different contexts. Using the MFP method helps ensure that the language has been thoroughly taught. Meaning, that should be fairly clear. But you should explain what the grammar means. For example, what tense it denotes, when we use it, and why. Form. How it is structured. For example, the present continuous is formed with the correct form of be plus the verb in the ing form. Pronunciation. How do you say the grammar in a sentence? For example, with present continuous, you will regularly contract the be in the subject, and you may also drop the g in the ing, like she's going shopping. We're going to look at an example from the General English series of explicit and implicit grammar teaching. The first explicit example is taken from Level 1, Topic 5. You can see in the course book that learners are instructed to read the grammar key, which tells them using meta-language what the grammar is and how it is used and constructed. They then use this to complete rules and practice tasks in the practice book. Then we have an example of implicit grammar. The grammar here is taught through a speaking and writing task and then demonstrated in a reading task. The tasks also focus on vocabulary, but encourage learners to use the grammar out of necessity in order to communicate their ideas and use the vocabulary at the same time. It allows them to learn from each other's example and for the teacher to monitor who already has the grammar knowledge and who needs to refine it. Although the task does direct students to consult the grammar key in the course book, there is no explicit teaching point for the grammar. Meta-language is not necessary either. By including the grammar structure in a text, as in the case in the GES, the learners can see 1. How they use the structures in everyday life. 2. That the grammar structure use is often restricted by vocabulary or meaning, as is the case in the difference between used to and would in describing past habits. 3. If there are other connected patterns used in the same context. 4. The meaning beyond sentence level, as in a response in a dialogue. Notice that in these two examples of explicit and implicit grammar, the implicit task is taught earlier in the lesson than the explicit task. Implicit tasks like this are often used as a form of testing what the students already know, and then teaching it more explicitly later in the class. The independent grammar practice is the last task in every topic. There will be 15 extra questions based around the grammar of the main lesson. So, in the lesson it is important to remember that you don't do the last task in class. This is for the students' use outside of lesson time. The questions are marked automatically on the app. Grammar is an area of weakness and worry for many, and it is important to practice outside of class, rather than just relying on the teacher. You yourself, although a teacher, need to make sure you are confident and accurate in your own grammar. Remember, you are the example in the classroom and who the students look to as their model.
These are the hashtag words to take from this session. Write a short summary of the session using the hashtag words and examples where possible.